Yharnam residents and healing church officials have expressed concern over a massive spike of gun-related injuries in the past few weeks. Community organizations have turned their suspicion to the Hunter Workshop and its use of firearms.
That talking square is becoming a problem. I keep shooting it with my cannon, but the next day it reappears, and its words grow more unkind. With me I carry the firearms of fortitude, the pistols of penance, the Gatling Guns of justice, and these squares have jaddled this city's Juns for long enough. For a golden bullet from this very righteous palace will find my target. By calculatoring the bullet's trajectory, I can project my physical form straight to the source of injustice. I knew I'd find you here.
Whoa, take it easy, man.
You seem awfully nervous for someone who's about to get shot. Now I just need to carefully weigh my options with a list numbered 1 through 16. The Wooden Shield. Shields make up a small portion of left-handed armaments that cannot accept blood gems, nor can they be fortified via blood shards. Despite using fortification to improve the damage reduction properties of the shield, just making complete sense. Yet you are given so many messages by the game itself that this is not the play. That being unable to improve damage reduction in such a way suddenly looks very intentional. Blocking doesn't prevent being inflicted with status ailments like poison. Your stamina regenerates at a much slower rate when blocking with the shield, although this is true with every FromSoft game, but in this game it's very noticeable. And even though it's able to mitigate 50% damage dealt by both physical and blood attacks, that holds little to no importance when a single attack from enemies bigger than a standard huntsman will leave you in a guard-broken state that doubles all damage taken until recovery. And that's really bad news when even the stupidest, most basic enemies in the game still have a decent grasp on how attack combos work. Even triple stacking anti-clockwise gives me barely enough room to withstand maybe 1 or 2 weak attacks from same-sized enemies before I either need to put the shield back down to make sure I don't get it up my ass, or I need to step away and heal because standing in front of a charging boar somehow took more brain cells than remembering I had capable legs. It's not even that shields and extra damage reduction by themselves are inherently bad in this game or anything, but you are purposefully given next to no resources to plug into a build anchored around standing in place and taking punishment, and the additional damage taken when staggered is a way too effective deterrent for me to even attempt making it work. You can be visceraled by hunter NPCs, restoring HP via rally lends itself to a more proactive playstyle anyways, not to mention the multiple runes that feed into visceral attacks, including one that restores HP when said attack is successfully executed. Experienced players know enough about the game to properly explain these details to dissuade passive playstyles, but newer players are given a 72-point bold text warning message contained in the fucking description of the item itself. The takeaway is as clear as day. This game does not brook pussyfooting, and I'd look for someone's skull to get caved in if it tried any harder to send that home. Number 15, the torch. It's mentioned in this item's description that the worst part of being a beast is the inheritance of a debilitating fight or flight instinct when presented in open flame, similar to how YouTubers act when presented any form of accountability. Little did I know my observation skills 11 years ago were narrow enough to miss the actual purpose of both torch items, which is to alert you that fire can also be a means to disarm certain beasts of their aggression. And by certain, I mean one, and by one, I mean the beasts in Old Yharnam, and by beasts in Old Yharnam, I mean not even the ones that wear cloaks, including the bigger ones. This is the only notable function of the default torch, and it's a function that gets pretty much immediately overshadowed because Old Yharnam just so happens to be the location of the Hunter's Torch, which features twice the base damage of the original torch and much higher arcane scaling to boot. In fact, the only reason I could find for not outright ignoring it was that you need to pick it up for the Hunter's Essence trophy for obtaining all weapons in the game. So if the Venn diagram here looks kinda lopsided, you can thank the very wiki page that cited that tip for preventing a complete shutout, because shopping around for any other counter argument is starting to feel like a waste of time. Number 14, the Gatling Gun. There's one thing more painful in life than not getting what you wanted, which is finding out the hard way that what you wanted wasn't all that great. And there's one thing more painful in life than that, which is realizing what you wanted could have been brought to a state considered moderately acceptable with just a tiny amount of effort someone in the office decided you weren't worth. Which is why the Gatling Gun remains a cornerstone example of the monkey's paw curling into a fist and then punching you in the fucking mouth. Let's talk about the Gatling Gun for a minute. The Gatling Gun takes roughly half a second to begin firing compared to the visibly shorter startup seen on Flamesprayer and Rosmarinus, introducing a bit of unwieldiness to the equation, but that's something to be expected when your firearm has the galactic density that it has. It consumes quicksilver bullets very quickly despite firing multiple shots per bullet, but only every few shots will actually deal damage since bullets fired from the weapon come with a 0.6 second hit history. So even though you can deal damage multiple times at the price of one QS bullet, there is still a visible bottleneck that unfortunately prevents the weapon from performing too well. Now, granted, the same bottleneck is also visible on the Flamesprayer and the Rosmarinus, but given all the glaring negatives seen on the Gatling Gun, it just becomes a much bigger problem. Giving some boss enemies a nice lead seasoning actually ended up being a decently low-risk option for depleting super armor while at range. I was able to knock down a Dark Beast purely via gunfire by just pretending I was playing Armored Core 6 for 30 seconds, and I actually got excited because I thought I finally discovered an advantage I could seriously talk about here. And then I looked up and realized how many bullets it took to even get to the point that we are now. There are some real competencies this weapon clearly could have had, and I think that should be given the utmost attention because I need you to be as angry as I was upon realizing I was just flushing valuable items down the shitter by stuffing it with bone marrow ash. If it has no impact on damage, then why the fuck even let me use the item to begin with? It's not like you already had something going on with Flamesprayer and Rosmarinus, like the system of using it on automatic weapons was there. So why give it that compatibility just to make the multiplier a 0? An extra double damage here and there wouldn't have threatened the balance or anything. It still misses half its shots on enemies agile enough to dodge around it, which is apparently a much lower bar than I thought. I kept throwing this weapon into different boss encounters, desperately trying to find something good to say about it. And Ludwig aura walking to the side and somehow avoiding a full 3-second salvo of gunfire was one of the last clips I remember catching before I just gave up. Number 13, the Fist of Gratia. I really don't sympathize with the hate on this. Like, it's bad. It's definitely bad, don't get me wrong. But I can smell this little chunk of iron concealing some secret sauce in its trench coat. This is an armament that only scales with one thing, and that's your knowledge of the game's own super armor system and how to use it against certain large enemy and strength. And it also scales with strength. Way more than I expected, honestly. But the near S scaling it gets ultimately does very little for its poor damage output. Even on a 40 strength build, hits that connect for anything above 200 damage are pretty uncommon. It does deal blunt damage, but the weapon's rejection of blood gems makes it almost impossible to take advantage of that unless you've read the wiki enough times over and you've just memorized what enemies are weak to blood damage, or you watch a YouTuber who thought ahead and included a list of those exact enemies. Join my Patreon. As for the super armor abuse, I briefly touched on what super armor was and how it worked in the tools ranking video, and I think now is a great time to reintroduce it a bit more properly. So, super armor is the system that governs when an enemy will flinch from one of your attacks. And the reason you can go so long without noticing the system is even there is because most enemies don't even have it. Instead, it's commonly relegated to larger foes and boss enemies that prevent them from being knocked around like a pinball from every other player attack, since that would feel very stupid and dumb and boring and stupid and dumb. BSB, Orphan, and Ludwig's first phase all have noticeably weak super armor, at least compared to other boss enemies. Bosses like these are where I think the Fist of Gratia has the highest abuse potential because it can hit enemies for 50 super armor damage. And if you were already whacking the same target before, a single hit from the fist will almost always proc an instant flinch. And knowing exactly when a large enemy is going to flinch from one of your attacks is a tremendous advantage because you can then use that short window of time to do a variety of things, like charge an R2, which might occasionally snowball into a broken limb, forcing the boss into an even longer window of uselessness, giving you another charged R2, and possibly even force a staggered state where you can go for a visceral. If you've ever seen a speedrunner streaming and they just go to town on a boss without being attacked even once, it's usually this system that they're keeping track of. Beefy non-boss enemies like sharks and nightmare executioners are also difficult to stun, and are therefore prone to super armor abuse. It's something this weapon does really well, but I still can't say it deserves too much praise because I just think knowing the system is even there to abuse in the first place is way more important. It kind of feels like counting cards in a blackjack game, you know, like it's right on the line of what feels like forbidden knowledge where you're not completely sure if it's something you should be thinking about, but it took full stop data mining for us to figure out righteous and serrated damage even existed back in the day, so I don't feel bad for it and you shouldn't either. Oh, and it's also the only left-hand weapon capable of restoring HP via rally. Like, I get that it's not earning any blue ribbons at the county fair or anything, but like, come on, is it really as bad as people say it is? Number 12, the Hunter's Torch. Pick it up in old Yharnam, and then sell that old one as quickly as you can. No joke, that shitty boat paddle cannot leave your inventory fast enough. Better arcane scaling than the default torch weapon, but not unlike the default torch, its arcane scaling still doesn't increase with any fortification, nor can it heal HP via rally. The stat benchmarks are low enough to be used right as you pick it up, regardless of starting class, and it needs a bullet expense of exactly 0, making it a pretty decent straightforward means of damage if the concept of counterattacking sounds too intimidating to learn, and swing hot stick when push button feels just right. I was almost gonna make a point earlier about exploring Loran and figuring out how frequently you can run into these enemies, and I feel like the point just had its home here in this section instead of the default torch, because I really feel the need to underline this as much as possible when I say it, because holy shit, these guys are fucking scary in Cursed Dungeons. I always keep this slotted in as a secondary left-hand option when I'm in Cursed Loran, and I've never regretted it one time. Sprint into an open room carelessly enough and suddenly you're being followed by a whole pack of these bitches. And don't even think about bottlenecking them through a doorway, because all they're gonna do is force themselves right through anyways. So when the game gives me a surefire trap card I get to just whip out and defuse entire ambushes from even happening, I'm taking the shit out of it. Number 11, the Loch Shield. Y'all are gonna think I'm full of shit. It's really not that bad. So a 70% reduction versus all elements is something that can be useful in fringe cases. It's actually very useful in some of those cases, but it can get you killed just as frequently, like I'm just gonna be honest. It might sound like a good idea to use it to block Rom's AoE attack into the boss's later phases, but this maneuver almost always breaks your guard and leaves you open to being attacked by one of the spider ads, which has a high chance of just outright one-tapping you since you take double damage in a guard-broken state. I'm not gonna act like it wasn't difficult to find positives for this one, but spend enough time sniffing around the fringe and you'll find a few cases in which it fares surprisingly well, and in some cases it's even broken. And that's already more than I can say for the fucking Gatling gun. If you're fighting a dark beast, it's a decent barrier against its lightning AoE attack it usually uses when under pressure. Ligarius has quite a few arcane bullet spams it can block well against. It chews up fireballs decently enough, and I feel like I'm running into those a bit too often in Chalice dungeons lately, so I'm gonna go ahead and italicize that one. Brador and Lady Maria's latter phases both get their damage nullified pretty hard too because of the 70% blood defense. I actually wasn't expecting it to pull the weight it did against Shadows of Yharnam, because one anti-clockwise rune and dodging around fireball spam becomes almost completely unnecessary. Some of the flame attacks, like those found on Keeper of the Old Lords, a Chalice dungeon exclusive boss, actually don't exhaust stamina when contacting the player, so you can literally just walk up to him and just have the shield up. Just zero fear, no consequences, just eat that shit right up. It does nothing to you. I mean, it does a little bit. You're still face tanking a flame attack, but like, look at this shit's ridiculous. But if you got yourself into a situation that requires holding up a shield and blocking something, I can't help but feel like there are some other lessons you should have learned first. I'm glad I found out how good it is at eating fireballs in the Shadows of Yharnam fight and against Keeper of the Old Lords, because that's now a cool little advantage I get to talk about. But I would have never learned that had I not been looking for ways to necessitate its use to begin with, because either kiting the other two dipshits around the tombstone or just dodging around it has proven to be enough literally every other time. Number 10, Ludwig's Rifle. The abundance of hitboxes on blunderbuss type weaponry is something that I really thought I would enjoy using a bit more. Every other entry in the bestiary seems capable of borderline Olympic acrobatic feats, and even some of the larger bosses hop and skip around like someone set the cathedral floor on fire. So the whole damage no matter what approach of a shotgun spread looked palatable on paper to me, but this also means targets with a hitbox more dynamic than a fat circle is capable of absorbing any amount of hits from I'll take what I can get to this game fucking sucks, unless you're just at Rectum Ragnarok range like you're stuffing a Christmas stocking. And at that point, if you're searching for high damage, why wouldn't you just use your right hand weapon? Blunderbuss weapons can only parry enemies if they're close enough to the bullet cone, but I don't feel like this matters too much since capitalizing on a staggered enemy to begin with is much easier when the target is staggered at mid to close range regardless. As for the direct comparison, Ludwig's Rifle is technically stronger than Blunderbuss, but only if you have poor blood tinge, with damage output favoring the blunderbuss starting at around 33. Despite this, the blunderbuss is given to you as one of the two starting weapons, so stumbling upon Ludwig's Rifle as your second blunderbuss type weapon, despite it being outperformed on high blood tinge builds anyways, doesn't really give it that wide of a window to actually do work that I would consider is worth the money. Number 9, the Cannon. You know, this actually used to cost 10 bullets before a patch. I didn't even need to look that up, I just remembered that shit. The cannon accomplishes two things, which is to allow high-strength builds access to insane amounts of damage at range, and the defeating of the point of allowing high-strength builds access to insane amounts of damage at range. It can be strengthened by using Bone Marrow Ash and by firing it at staggered enemies just to deal twice its damage, but I specifically and intentionally chose the word "and" in that sentence because its 12 bullet cost per pump affords it such pathetic sustain in practice that you need to be doing that with every shot if you want to live on a planet that allows you to say it's decent. But this is also how picking the cannon limits you in more ways than one, since this directly contradicts what would be one of the weapon's most useful runes, 𝐻𝐿 Writhe, which would have you go 4 visceral attacks on staggered enemies instead to take advantage of the extra bullet regen. And triple stacking communion runes makes literally zero difference at all, since you can still only fire the cannon twice even in between +5s, forcing you down the road of the formless 𝐻𝐿 triple stack, also known as the cannon runes, because when in the headbanging fuck are you gonna use these for anything else? This is what makes the two cannon firearms equally powerful and awkward to use, because the game is balanced in a way that ensures no amount of sustain for either of them. And when it comes down to these two specifically, I would still rather just take the hit in overall damage by settling for the Church Cannon for its far quicker recovery time, 2 less bullet cost, better AoE damage, and its ability to aim it up high and land some pretty ridiculous shots on targets further away from you. Like, that last detail doesn't mean too much in practice, since gravity starts to get pretty overbearing on the projectile after a certain amount of hang time, but I do like the idea of fooling my adversaries into thinking they're in 𝐁𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿 land, where raining kettlebells is just another negative side effect of throwing back the sauce. Number 8, the Piercing Rifle. Alright, Mr. Information, prepare to put your wife on a leash. Parrying attacks is still possible, and in fact, pulling off the parry part of the parry itself is just as possible on the Piercing Rifle as it is for any other weapon. Church servants still get staggered by looking at them and raising your eyebrows too quickly, but I think the description is pointing out its longer recovery time more than it has anything to do with the actual behavior of parrying. Even though I felt next to no difference in parry timing on basic enemy attacks, the good few frames of difference that prevented me from actually capitalizing on their staggered state still felt way harder to deal with. In fact, I even noticed that getting hit as the shot connected would actually make things drastically easier due to the ouch animation when getting hit just having a smaller recovery time. It doesn't really mean landing parries in any capacity is innately more difficult or anything, but it's definitely not recommended to even be equipped if you're building around viscerals. With that in mind, I didn't feel like the ability to pierce enemies would really come in handy that often, and son of a bitch am I glad I remembered what game I was playing for 2 seconds, because Bloodborne features some of the highest density environmental design of any FromSoft game, with tons of tightly packed corridors making up around 90% of its fighting space. It's like playing through 𝐼𝐿 Lucaria, only it's the whole game. And listening to me say that is actually a verbal contract in which you agree to take that comparison exactly as seriously as I was when I wrote it down. Finding instances where this rifle can perform isn't nearly as tricky as it might sound. Chalice dungeons are probably the best example of this. Even if you find yourself surrounded by more dead air than a gacha livestream, there always seems to be a choke point nearby in which you can lead crowds of enemies through to maximize the amount of up you can fuck with one well-timed bullet. Upper Cathedral Ward, the latter half of Old Yharnam, basically any couple of rooms that are separated by nothing more than a small doorway can be easily exploited, and the frequency in which I found these opportunities increased equally with my fondness for the weapon itself, until it ended up becoming one of my favorite firearms to just fuck around with. Number 7, the Rosmarinus. You can still use Bone Marrow Ash to boost its damage, and staggered enemies will always take double damage no matter what, but choosing this over the Flamesprayer means giving up on 1/3 of its potential synergy, because fire damage can also be boosted with oil urns. It can lay down some pretty massive damage for characters with a high arcane investment, since the Rosmarinus has the second highest scaling of all firearms in the game as a counterweight to its lower base damage, and arcane as a damage type, generally just having no distinct utility in the same way as the other two non-physical types. It bears similarity to the Flamesprayer in more ways than the make of the firearm itself, namely that they have the shortest wind-up time of any other left-hand weapon, firing them doesn't consume stamina, and one use of Bone Marrow Ash can boost several ticks worth of damage. This feels like the trump card of both firearms, but it doesn't feel like it matters nearly as much on this weapon, because the Flamesprayer can be boosted by Bone Marrow Ash and a well-placed oil urn, since one is a debuff, in addition to keeping crowds crowds of various enemies at bay with a much higher confidence. This is an advantage the Rosmarinus feels a bit more deserving of to me, because sweeping the city streets with Lysol is unsurprisingly very ineffective at flinching even smaller enemies, vastly narrowing the scope at which you're able to actually abuse that BMA bonus for sustained firing, because even basic enemies can just walk right through it and slap the weapon out of your hands. Number 6, the Church Cannon. It's got a faster reload time, and it costs 2 less bullets. I could stop my explanation right there and it would still be a decently compelling case for why this makes for an all-around better choice than the base game cannon, and I can even talk about how the cannon has a timer attached to the projectile it fires that forces it to detonate after a half second of airtime, inherently limiting its effective range. But explaining all this in detail and then just calling it a paragraph would also be omitting what is far and away, without competition, the Church Cannon's strongest benefit, and it's actually something you wouldn't even be blamed for missing, since cannon-type weapons are commonly used as single-target giant killers. It's not like the Church Cannon doesn't also hand damage worthy of applause in this situation to boot, but there exists a hidden blade in this Church Cannon's pockets, which is that the Church Cannon projectile shares an attack value with its impact. And what this means is direct and indirect hits will always land with the same amount of damage. This falls in direct contrast to the default cannon, which deals way more damage on a direct hit, while its AoE hits for noticeably less, around 50% give or take, giving the Church Cannon far more punching power against groups of enemies. It makes for a reliable option to take care of sudden ambushes in Chalice dungeons, and suicide sprinting down a hallway of angry 𝐿𝐴𝐻 maidens takes a significantly reduced amount of balls, because I know what's waiting for them at the end of that hallway and they don't. Number 5 and 4, the Blunderbuss and Pistol. Blunderbuss firearms technically have higher damage output than pistols, but only on the condition that you're close enough to the target for a considerable majority of the bullets to connect. Blunderbuss weapons can hit enemies up to 15 times, each bullet dealing its own independent damage to a single target, meaning blood gems that increase its blood damage by a flat amount will usually give way higher bonuses depending on what the number is. Blunderbuss shots also have a stronger impact than bullets fired from pistols, which noticeably feeds into its ability to reduce target mobility by constantly forcing smaller enemies into a flinch animation. But they also can't be used to parry attacks from further distances, even if a target technically gets hit with the bullet spread right before an attack. And I think this is why it's been going around for a while that it's more difficult to parry with a blunderbuss than it is a pistol. Like, it is true, but it's not really true in the way people think it is. What actually matters is the recovery time post-fire being noticeably longer on the blunderbuss. And when people talk about how much easier it is to parry with a pistol firearm, this is what they're usually referring to. This operates around the logic that bigger weapons are innately less mobile, subject to heavier recoil, and need a higher strength investment despite not scaling with strength because, and I'm not sure how many of you might be able to put this together, a large iron tube that fires free weights like basketballs can be a little difficult for most builds to just pick up and use. And P90X didn't exist back then, so if bitch-ass 𝐿10 strength wants a cannon for Christmas, then he'd better learn how to get the fuck over himself. Number 3, Evelyn. Apparently there's this misconception that's been buzzing around for a while that says the firing animation is technically faster than the other two pistols by a good frame or two, but this isn't really the case. It's just got a little spice thrown on the firing animation, is all. Looking back at footage of both Evelyn and the other two pistols allow us to observe the length of all their firing animations being the exact same, even down to the muzzle flash and everything. The standard issue Hunter pistol can still just barely come out on top with a build that stays anywhere below 22 blood tinge, and considering the requirement of the Evelyn pistol, leveling in that direction will almost always point to Evelyn being the more optimal choice. It's the kind of weapon that's meant for big boy parries, but it also gives you some great damage on the side on top of that. Although it races ahead of the standard issue Glock given to you at the start of the game, I still can't help but feel like Evelyn is in kind of an awkward place, indecisively sitting on the fence between the freshly cut lawns of Gun Damage McBonash and Dr. Spine Blaster, and the result of that is the weapon just not feeling like it's the de facto choice of either approach. And I say that while unashamedly running it down the throat of the castle as soon as I get that envelope on every single playthrough, specifically so that I can ditch the standard pea shooter for the queen bitch. If I'm using guns for parrying, I'm not going to care what my damage is and will likely just stick to one of the two starting weapons. And if I do care about damage, then Well, I mean, we're just about done. I mean, you can count, right? But the obvious drawback with that is some enemies just can't be parried nor visceraled. Some of them have skinny enough hitboxes to lower the damage ceiling on shotguns by a good couple floors if they just don't outright sidestep the entire bullet cone altogether, somehow. And it can eventually get to a point where you realize just how thirsty you are for even a drop of consistency. And the Evelyn will give that to you in spades. Number 2, the repeating pistol. The downright dead-ass, dastardly damage you can get from a single BMA has been making noises audible enough to wake up multiple households. And 2 pixels a pump is the tiniest asking price I could have bargained for in a game where I can clip my fingernails and materialize my own ammo. It proudly brandishes the highest base damage of any pistol option, but its blood tinge scaling ends up at an 80 at plus 10, which honestly, it's not even that bad. And I think when looking at the weapon in its entirety, the repeating pistol gets the vim and vigor that it does because of its ammo consumption drawback that honestly just isn't even that big of a deal. Like, it's so easy to skirt around that it just doesn't even matter. It does technically use 2 bullets, but it still only fires 1 bullet object, making it impossible to ever receive half damage due to one shot just like barely missing a target or something like that. I remember constantly waiting for something like this to happen when I first played it, and it just never did. So for the 5 people who still have that anxiety, just get rid of it. The only thing you'll need to pay attention to is the damage, and this is the kind of damage blunderbuss type weapons are fighting tooth and nail to score, even against most boss enemies that don't have a hitbox large enough to eat up all 15 bullets. Imagine having all that firepower nicely, conveniently compacted into a single pissed off projectile that's able to hand out over 2,000 damage when spiced up with a BMA on a stagger target of any size from any range. Bitch, 2 ammo shmoo ammo. That little tinge of oxidization right there on the barrel is textbook environmental storytelling that tells you exactly what you need to do to counteract that double consumption. You just press up on the D-pad, sacrifice a little blood, and suddenly you just no longer have to give a shit. Number 1, the Flamesprayer. Okay, so let's talk. Flintlocks, firearms, and flame sticks are a dime a dozen, a penny a pile. Blunderbusses get some pretty impressive damage, pistols are a fine duelist's armament, and if I'm looking to double dip, then hell, Evelyn and repeating pistol are perfectly capable of both. But I have a hunger to inflict immense pain on this city's beastly threats. A voracious, irrepressible hunger that could earn its own book in the Bible, it's so sinful. And my carnivorous appetite has led me to none other than the claim staker, the face flayer, the Flamesprayer. This is proper heat. This is a weapon with some motherfucking spice, because it's the only one of the 12 hunter firearms that deal fire damage, and you'll notice I said firearms there because I'm not including either of the torch weapons, and therefore the only firearm that can take advantage of a comically harmful triple synergy. Bone marrow ash, oil urn, double damage from staggered enemies, all at once. This opens a window for several thousands of damage to be inflicted in only a couple short seconds when all 3 bonuses are played into properly. Like, I'm talking cannon adjacent damage at the cost of like 2 bullets, all without even considering the bitch you're torching might have a fire weakness as well. And that's a pretty high chance because fire is the most common enemy weakness and it's not even close. The trick, and with a bit of practice, it's honestly not even that hard, is to set up all 3 in a way that minimizes player fuck-uppage. First, pop the BMA. It has the longest active duration at 60 seconds, so it should be used before anything else. Use a good limb breaker weapon like a transformed threaded cane, a beast cutter, a saw spear, any of those work fine. Break something, then throw out the oil urn when they're stuck in the goddamn it that hurts animation. Now it's gonna last you for 30 seconds. Either parry the boss a second time, or start breaking all the limbs you can to force a stagger animation. If the boss has a visibly discernible head like Cleric Beast, aim for that instead, proc a stagger, let it rip, and enjoy your 4,000 plus damage. There is no marker big enough to properly underline what little practice this takes to set up, as long as you can dig up a thread of patience within yourself. And if you play games like this to relax on weekends, then God knows you've the fixins equipped for it. Both items involved stay active for more than enough time for you to play it safe and look for a good opportunity, and the journalists who just started playing this again because they saw there's a movie coming out and refused to learn how to parry can still benefit from a BMA oil urn combo, with fire damage being a catch-all master turnkey solution for, I would say, the first 60% of the game's mainline content. How does the hunt manage to stay such a terrifying topic in civilian conversations when a weapon like this is allowed to exist? This should have been the standard issue mass-produced firearm for all of Yharnam. Creatures like Rom and Amelia get to sleep soundly without knowing they're one constitutional amendment away from becoming a generational joke, a chicken in every pot, and a gallon of napalm in every garage. And if some dumb c*** burns his house down, then he should have taken the fucking safety course.
Let's keep this up.